missing Christy Ferrantella at the moment. I'm not sure if she'll be joining us later, but we will announce her if she does. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Tucker Holland?
Here, and Christy is joining right now.
Great. Christy, can you hear us?
Yes.
Great. So we'll amend that Christy is in attendance. Continuing on staff, Ken Beaugrand.
Present.
And Eleanor Antonetti.
Here.
Anticipated and potential speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. Attorney Michael Wilson, AKA Denise Batters. Can you come through audibly, please, versus the via text?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I'm just waiting for Mike to arrive. That's why I'm signed on for him.
Yeah, that's great. We just want to make sure the mic's working, that when there is an option. Attorney Reed, can you hear?
Here, I'm here.
Thank you. This open meeting of the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. And in order to mitigate the transmission of COVID-19, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement for physical requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. For this meeting, the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust is convening by the video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note the meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer or anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. The supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. We'll now turn to the first item on the agenda for this public information webinar. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for the effective and clear conduct of our business to ensure accurate meeting minutes.
Brian, it's not a webinar. I'm sorry. It's just a Zoom.
Okay, thank you. That's why I paused, because we went back and forth over the use of that the other day.
Sorry to interrupt you, but just want to clarify.
No, thank you. It's just an open Zoom meeting, not a webinar. I, the chair, will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members and registered participants, inviting each of them to provide by name to provide any comment or questions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, remember to mute your phone or your computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly. For any response, please wait until the chair leads the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If the members wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair and care to identify yourself. After panelists or members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged and speak through the chair. With that, we will turn to the agenda. And we will look for an approval of the agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Brooke Moore. Second by Christy Ferrantella. By roll call, Dave Iverson.
Aye.
Allison Mitchell.
Aye.
Brooke Moore. Rima Sherry.
Aye.
Penny Dye.
Aye.
Christy Ferrantella.
Aye.
And Brian Sullivan. Aye. Item number 2 on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the meetings of January 14th and January 19th. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, we'll look for a motion to approve.
Brooke, I move approval.
Second, Christy.
Moved by Brooke, second by Christy. By roll call, Dave Iverson.
Aye.
Allison Mitchell.
Aye.
Brooke Moore.
Aye.
Rima Sherry.
Aye.
Penny Dye.
Aye.
Christy Ferrantella.
Aye.
Brian Sullivan will abstain because I wasn't at the full meetings for those two.
No, wait, did you do them together?
There was one motion together because there was no comment on either.
Okay.
Item number 4, we have a mortgage for CCAP application post-closing. 17 Clarendon Street. I think this is for Mr. Gray. Denise, is Attorney Wilson there and available? Denise? Or Attorney Wilson?
Yes, I'm here. For some reason, the camera link is not opening. Apologize.
It's okay. We can hear you. We don't need to see you. Do you want to open this item as the?
Sure. In February of 2020, the commission voted to subordinate the trust mortgage to the primary mortgage with Cape Cod 5. The property owner has subsequently refinanced their primary mortgage with the same lender, Cape Cod 5. So we're asking that you vote in favor of subordinating your mortgage to that one, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. Staff, do you have any commentary?
We would support the subordination.
Yeah, we've done this exactly a year ago in a very similar situation for the same applicant.
Okay, great. And all paperwork's ready and prepared to be signed as far as?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is, and you have it via email, Brian, so as long as the board assents to your signing, it can be done as soon as you're able.
Okay, great. Board, is there any discussion on the item? Anybody by a show of hands? Seeing none, we'll look for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the application for subordination of this mortgage.
Eleanor, could you hear that? That's a motion from Penny
I'll second.
and a
Yes,
second.
I think there's a second motion to authorize the chair to sign.
Can we do
So,
them as one motion?
I suppose. Okay.
Then that's what my motion is.
And I'll second that motion, Rima.
Okay, great. By a roll call, Dave Iverson,
Aye.
Allison Mitchell,
Aye.
Brooke Moore,
Aye.
Rima Sherry,
Aye.
Penny Dye,
Aye.
and Brian Sullivan, aye. Thank you, Attorney Wilson and Denise. We'll get that paperwork to you at the completion of the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the board.
Moving on to item number 5, 2021 Town Warrant Meeting Articles Guidance. So this was a request by me to Tucker to check with Town Council as far as the trust members' ability to weigh in on any warrant articles that have been presented. So Tucker, I'll leave it to you to make.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is relatively brief matter. As the chair outlined, there was a question as to whether the trust can recommend and weigh in on different warrant articles on the town meeting warrant. And John Giorgio, town council, has provided guidance basically indicating that there is no legal prohibition against the trust from stating a recommendation on any article that comes before town meeting, as long as the recommendation was voted at a duly posted meeting of the trust. There is certainly inherent authority in the trust enabling legislation to make such recommendation. If the trust wishes to include a short recommendation in the finance committee booklet, then that would need to be coordinated in advance with the town manager and finance committee. Attorney Giorgio goes on to make particular note that if there is a ballot question associated with a warrant article, the trust should take care not to produce or mail any written material using town resources, advocating presumably for the passage of a ballot question. It may, however, make a recommendation with respect to town meeting action, but the ballot question should not be referenced.
Great. Open that to the board for any questions for Tucker or back to town council. So I think in general, potentially as we move forward through this time period, maybe we should have a posted item on future agendas for each article, take that conversation in hand, and then make a board decision as we move forward for each one, rather than taking them kind of unplanned ad hoc, give anybody an opportunity to present or talk about them. Anything else on any of those? Okay. Tucker, thank you for that. Quickly moving on to item 6, we have Attorney Reed here, sponsor of an article for some funding. So this is a great opportunity to hear from him. Mr. Reed, I'll turn it over to you for a presentation.
Thanks, Brian. This is an article that I filed once the town meeting reopened for the submission of new articles because of discussion that I'd heard regarding existing articles and the obvious continuing need that the town has for funding for affordable, what's technically affordable under the state act, and also year-round housing, which, as we know, is needed at levels that are in excess of the state levels, but at less than 150 or 200% of Nantucket median income. In any event, there have been various proposals made in that regard, and it seemed to me that the short-term rental tax coupled with the lodging house tax, which is really the same thing, they're all lumped together now, that if a substantial portion, and I put 2/3 in the warrant article, of the funds that were derived by the town on the 6% local option portion of the lodging tax, if that was diverted to housing purposes, that would provide a substantial source of revenue, and in addition would recognize the fact that the people who are using the town's services in connection with their short-term rentals and lodging house rentals are putting certain, the people that are supporting that industry, the people who perform services to that industry, are the people who need the housing in the town, or a substantial portion of them. And it would seem appropriate for money that is being derived from that source to be diverted to fund to support the town's very substantial housing needs. The exact mechanisms of this would need to be worked out, but there is provision in the state statute relating to this that enables it to be done. I understand that this has been done, or at least proposed, in several communities on the Cape, and I think that it would be appropriate for us to do it. I know there have been various other proposals as to diversion of funds from other sources to affordable housing, notably the article relating to the land bank fee. I know that that's very controversial, and I would hope that this would be a much less controversial way of diverting funds, or directing funds, perhaps I should say, toward this very important purpose.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Reed. First, I'll just start by saying thank you for the proposal on the article. Those of us that volunteer all our time and those that are employed in this process appreciate a private citizen coming to the table recognizing we need regular funding. So I appreciate that. I'll turn it over to board questions for Mr. Reed by show of hands. Penny Dye.
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm not sure if it's for Mr. Reed or for maybe Ken, but where is the select board in their decision-making process on how to allocate these funds?
Maybe if we can direct that to, I apologize, Christy, putting you on the spot, but if I can direct that to you as the select board rep.
Yeah, of course. So Tucker and I have been meeting with Brian, Denise from FinCom, and Libby and Town Council to look at a couple different options. This Wednesday, tomorrow, the select board meeting has an agenda item for discussing the funding. And so that recommendation is a line item in the town budget of 475,000. And then an override article for 7.5 million for safe harbor maintenance. So the select board will be discussing it tomorrow night.
Are you at liberty
Go
to
ahead, Penny.
share? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just wondering, what was the total brought in 2019 for Nantucket
For the short-term rental.
from the room occupancy tax?
So I don't think we have the total for the year yet, but I think through, I actually don't want to quote anything, but I know that it was up about 5 million compared to last year or more.
So it was, yeah, it was a $5 million gain, and the total was not far from a little over 7 million.
Okay, so it's probably accurate to assume that 5 million was generated by the rentals of short-term rentals, private homes, or thereabouts.
Right.
Thank you.
Brooke Moore?
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. So my understanding is that the budget as proposed and we've since been in, Christy and Tucker, there's been further conversations with the finance director and town administration with how to fund this. But the original budget proposal presented by town administration, I believe, included an increase of lodging tax into the general fund up from 1.9 million last fiscal year to in excess of $4 million this fiscal year. So clearly the intention at the administration level was to use the short-term rental bump into the general fund. So I think that's just interesting, not directing it to housing. The other thing that I want to ask, and Mr. Reed, you may or may not know this, but as far as I know, the only mechanism for locking short-term rental funds into a specific purpose is through a stabilization fund. And one of the disadvantages of a stabilization fund is to get the money out, you have to go to town meeting. So it creates a level of inflexibility to us in terms of accessing those dollars throughout the year. Now, I was in a conversation this morning and someone pointed out that, we could just have an article every year at town meeting floor that says X dollars of that stabilization fund will be voted out to the Affordable Housing Trust to be used for initiatives at our discretion, as opposed to having to go delay a particular project to get town meeting approval for accessing those funds. So it's a part of this funding equation that's interesting when you talk about the different funding streams and their relative costs and benefits or advantages and disadvantages. And that hurdle of accessing only through a town meeting vote of those funds year on year is just a piece of the puzzle. It's just to be informative. So I just wanted to make that point.
Can I ask Mr. Reed to address that? What your thought in designing the article?
Yes, Brooke is right. It is required under the state statute that these funds, if they are to be directed to a specific fund, that it be a stabilization fund. And obviously she's correct about the mechanism of dealing with a stabilization fund. I think we can deal with the point. If we have to have an annual vote to deal with it, that's fine. The point is to get the funds directed toward this purpose. And I think that enough people in town acknowledge and realize the significance of what we're doing with regard to affordable housing, that there won't be a great deal of difficulty in getting passage of such articles on an ongoing basis. If there were an easier way to do it, that would be great. But I wrote the article as a stabilization fund because that's what the statute calls for.
And Mr. Reed, do you see this in perpetuity
I
funding
missed
mechanism?
that. I missed that.
Do you see this as a funding mechanism in perpetuity for as long as the tax exists, or?
I would say, I mean, obviously things can be changed at any time in the future, but I don't see the need as going away, and therefore I think that it should be treated as an ongoing thing indefinitely.
Dave Iverson, I think I saw your hand up. No? Okay. Coming back to Penny.
Yeah, just quickly through you to Mr. Reed, is this article one that would require any kind of confirmation by a vote at the ballot box or not?
I don't believe so.
Excellent. Thank you for doing it.
And to the follow-up on that, on Penny's question, is this a majority vote or a 2/3 vote?
I believe it's a majority vote.
Any more board members with questions at the moment? I see staff has one. Not at the moment. Ken Bogran? Oh, sorry, Brooke. I'll come back to you, Brooke. Ken?
Arthur, just one point. I think if you go back, the original intent in the legislation setting up the 6% short-term rental thing was that it was supposed to be dedicated to be able to be used for affordable housing in terms of when it was set up with the legislature. And if that can be checked, it makes a stronger argument in terms of why this should be followed through right now, as opposed to having been diverted into the general fund.
Well, I think that the point there is that it would go to the general fund if not otherwise, if no other action is taken by the town. There are other purposes, I believe, as well as affordable housing, to which the funds can be directed. And I know that there have been some that have set up stabilization funds for other purposes that have at least been proposed and may have been voted in various towns on the Cape. That's about all I can say on the point.
And I'll come back to Brooke, I think. Did you have a question? Go ahead.
And I don't know if anyone here can answer it, but someone asked me about the distinction between a stabilization fund and an enterprise fund. But now I believe that this legislation designated stabilization fund as the only mechanism, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Penny?
One last question. Why are we not asking for the full percentage of the local room occupancy tax to go towards affordable housing?
The 2/3 that I put in there was just an arbitrary figure. I know that some of the funds have been used, I believe, well, it's been the general fund, but I believe that Visitor Services has been involved with the use of some of those funds. And certainly we don't want to completely wipe out any use of those funds for Visitor Services, because obviously that is important in connection with the short-term visits to the island as well. But I think that having a very large proportion of those funds be directly dedicated to housing needs is appropriate.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions from the board? We do have a general public hand up. I'd like to open up if any for that. Ms. Lindner, I see that your hand was up. Do you still have a question?
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is Julia Lindner. I'm the Executive Director of ACT Now. As you know, one of our initiatives is a bylaw to regulate short-term rentals, and the real goal there is to limit the number of investors purchasing homes to run a short-term rental business on the island. So in a previous meeting, I had the opportunity to come before you where I shared our research in the bylaw. And I was asked by one of the members of the committee to discuss the merits of attaching a recurring funding source for the housing trust directly to the lodging tax, or specifically to revenue coming from the short-term rentals tax collected. Since then, Mr. Reed has filed his article and that you're discussing today. So I'd like to just restate our position and for your thoughts. It's imperative that we find funding for housing and that it be part of the town's budget as a whole. If you attach it directly to the lodging tax, you're effectively creating an unhealthy dependency where, if the rise of investors running short-term rentals is causing some of the pressure on housing, which is where Mr. Reed was headed to some degree, then it's tying the problem to the solution. And it could really get people to say, oh, well, short-term rentals are great overall, across the board because they send money back to affordable housing. And although we agree that short-term rentals should be part of the picture, in reality, we think there's a better way to establish a solution. So it's sort of like saying that the tobacco tax should be the solution to the problems related to people smoking. Obviously, that's an extreme case, but you get where I'm going here. So the good news is that the additional lodging tax revenue and other revenue streams go directly to the general fund, right? And that is a much more stable pie, if you like, as a whole, whereas the lodging tax is clearly fluctuating year over year. So the Affordable Housing Trust and the community as a whole would be better served by dedicating a stable amount of funds every year from the general fund budget rather than the lodging tax specifically. And
Do you have any more specifically on Mr. Reed's?
on Mr. Reed, well, I was curious, I guess one of the things I would sort of clarify, the rental tax though, and the lodging tax as a whole, one of the committee members asked, why isn't the whole thing dedicated to housing? I would just reiterate that the town has relied on this in its budget, right? And it's not on a specific line item like visitor services. It's really goes into the general pie. And so it, to some degree, is reliant on that revenue, at least until, short-term rental taxes showed up. But no, I'm very, curious about Mr. Reed's article, and we'll be keeping a close eye on your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reed, did you have any final commentary that you'd like to share with us?
No, I imagine that we'll be having further discussions about this with you and with other groups. I think that a lot of interesting questions were raised today, and I think this is something we all need to be working on.
Again, super appreciative of you and your role as a citizen coming to the table with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, Brian.
So Eleanor, I would assume that we'll carry this item for further discussion onto a future agenda. Okay, great. So moving to item, let's see, 6.7, housing production plan update. Tucker, do you have?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also want to thank Mr. Reed for his proposal and being here today. So with regard to the housing production plan, as the board knows, we are in the midst of the work with the consultants. The survey is out and live. It is accessible through the Affordable Housing Trust page on the town website, and it will be open until February 12th. It is available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And so far, we've had approximately 450 people complete the survey. As well, we are in the process of signing people up for the 6 different focus groups that Jen and Judy will be conducting with their teams. There are 48 slots that can be filled across all 6 focus groups. And thus far, we have had 29 people sign up for those groups. So we're going to send a reminder out today to those folks who may not have had an opportunity to sign up for a time yet. As well, if we get a note back that they simply can't make any of them, we do have a list of folks who have indicated they would like to be able to participate if there is space. So I anticipate we're going to have a full house for those. The last thing to mention for the moment is that following the survey work and the focus groups, the next sort of big session, if you will, with Judy and Jen will be on March 23rd, where the second webinar will take place, and that is intended to share some of the ideas and findings that have come out of this work during this period. And that is the update. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I will note that Eleanor and Tucker did update on the website the meeting schedule, and it does include some of those webinars. So anybody from the public who wants to catch up on future meeting dates, time, or HPP stuff, the schedule is up. Anyone have any comments or questions on HPP at this time? Okay, seeing none. We'll move over to item number 8, housing bank bill update. Allison thoughtfully asked if we could catch the board and the public up on kind of the status of the housing bank bill update, where it stands in Boston, and kind of other community support. I did notice that there was Martha's Vineyard Times had written a few articles recently related to it and circulated, so it's generated some conversation. Tucker, if you would lead the update for us.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to go over a little history, as the board will recall, we originally submitted what we refer to as our housing bank bill through the home rule petition process to the State House approximately 5 years ago. It has been voted on at, I believe, 4 separate town meetings to date. 3 of those meetings, the 3 most recent votes, were all unanimous in support of the measure. And the bill very much mimics the Land Bank Enabling Act and would, if passed, provide a ongoing revenue stream as proposed 0.5% of the amounts in real estate transactions over $2 million. So in a $3 million transaction, that would equate to a $5,000 fee paid by the seller. There have been a number of folks who have advocated on behalf of the bill, testified up at the State House. Each session, it has made progress through the House, generally, getting favorable recommendations out of a series of 2 or 3 committees, and then ending up in bills in third reading, which is sort of the gating committee to get to the floor. And as we all know, the prior speaker, Speaker DeLeo, was unwilling to take it out of that committee. So since we initiated our measure, there have been a number of other communities that have jumped on board, if you will, in this last year, including notably Boston, Somerville, Provincetown, Concord, Brookline, and others. So where I think initially the thought was, we're Nantucket, we're kind of in this very unique situation. Maybe this might sort of, go through without too much concern. The Massachusetts Association of Realtors really targeted the bill. They don't like it. And they have very actively fought it. So I think the other communities have said, well, maybe there's strength in numbers. So that's kind of the approach that we're going with right now. There's a statewide transfer fee coalition that is working to pass enabling legislation that would allow communities to opt in to a local transfer fee. So if one of the versions that are out there were ultimately to pass, it would allow us to do more or less what our own home rule petition is proposing. It actually allows greater latitude, but it certainly would allow us to do what we intended. So there are a couple of different schools of thought amongst the legislators about what the right look is for statewide enabling legislation. The coalition has come around setting a threshold level rather than at $2 million in our case at the median home price in a given community. I think that Dylan Fernandez, our representative, and others, Rep. Malia from the Boston area, are proposing an alternate version which is what is referred to as, call it the luxury version. So where it would apply only to properties $1 million and above. And again, that would fit with what we are trying to do anyway. There's increasing activity around passage of a transfer fee in support of housing. I mentioned there is a statewide coalition, I would say, on these steering meetings, which occur at least monthly now. There are roughly 25 folks from across the Commonwealth who are actively engaged. Brian made reference to the Martha's Vineyard has actually hired full-time, like someone exclusively to focus on passage of a transfer fee for housing. Someone with strong community organizing experience. I had a terrific call with her yesterday, Laura Silber, and we will be participating in a call a week from Friday with the Cape and Islands delegation and other housing representatives from across this region to talk to the legislators about our priorities around housing. And it's very clear that the Vineyard and ourselves, this is what would matter. So during the prior session, the governor's housing choice legislation passed, and that had been a huge priority for the governor and lieutenant governor. It's around zoning. It makes it easier to pass zoning that supports the creation of affordable housing, whereas most zoning bylaw changes require a 2/3 vote if it's related to housing. Now, following the passage of this legislation, it only would take a simple majority. In practicality, I'm not sure it has a lot of meaning for Nantucket because we already had a number of housing helpful aspects to our zoning bylaws, such as allowing tertiary apartments and so forth, multifamily by right, et cetera. But that the fact that that legislation is now passed the State House allows more or less everyone to turn their attention from zoning really truly to funding, which we have all known here for quite some time is really what we need to address the issue. So I would say there is going to be quite a push in this session to see a form of housing transfer fee pass the legislature. It's, it's difficult to predict, if it will happen. But I would certainly say there is an effort being mounted, unlike any we've seen so far. And it's great to have, friends in the fight with us, so to speak. A lot of smart people. We had a call recently where this is kind of the point that it's at. We've decided that not only will it be introduced in the House at the start of this session, but it will simultaneously be introduced in the Senate. And we're in the position of having several senators wanting the opportunity to sponsor the bill. In the Senate, there can only be one sponsor. So we were in the position of interviewing senators about who we felt was really going to get, behind this effort. And I think that we've ended up with someone extremely capable. So Senator Joe Comerford, who is out of Hampshire and Franklin counties, is going to be the Senate sponsor. We can have any number of co-sponsors along with it. I'm sure Julian will be one. But anyway, there's a strong press to move this forward. And maybe at this point, I'll just answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Tucker. Show of hands, anybody on the board with questions for Tucker? Seeing none at the moment. From the board, We'll close boards. I have a general public. Tobias, you're listed as Zach Smart, but I think that's you. Can you announce yourself by name?
Oh, sorry, Tobias Glidden. I will change my Zoom thing for the record. Just a quick question, Tucker. Do you know if that $1 million, would that be tied to like inflation or some, Mark?
Dylan is going to send, he's working on the draft that he is going to submit. So new legislation to get heard in the normal course needs to be submitted by February 19th. We have a meeting with him next Thursday that's just Nantucket folks to talk about this as well. We have the meeting the next day with the Cape and Island delegation. So we've asked for a copy of the draft, and I'm sure we'll get it shortly.
Great, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Tucker. Any more questions from the
Tobias.
general public? Show of hands. I see one from staff. Ken, floor is yours. Ken, go ahead. Ken, go ahead.
Tobias, I think that the $1 million is a threshold as opposed to being a cap.
Yeah, I guess my thought was, we might see, with inflation over the next 10, 20 years, we might see values go up a lot. And we want to make sure we tie whatever legislation goes in place should be tied to inflation in theory, because otherwise, 10 years from now, $1 million may not be a lot for a house.
Well, I think as we've seen the land bank make adjustments to their basis, I would hope that the legislation would allow for the similar adjustments as far as the exemption amounts or raising the limits or reducing it.
For sure. So the threshold that would be included is the floor, and we're able to set anything above that we would want.
Any more questions on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll close that and move to item number 9, land bank donation. I apologize, my camera's off, I'm just bouncing, so I figured it's less distracting. Tucker, do you want to update everybody on the donation of the Mickey Rowland building?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So everyone, I think, has received in their packet a copy of the proposal from the land bank, sort of in writing. And I guess a couple of things to point out there, just so I think everyone understands. Generally, the concept has been the land bank purchased the Rowland building. I believe the address is 13 Commercial Wharf. It's immediately adjacent to Petrel's Landing. And they had nicely approached us about, do we have a use for the building? And they had proposed donating the building in addition to the cost of the move with respect to the actual move itself. So call it the Toscana part of the move. There would of course be additional expense involved with our own general contractor in cutting the building, because it will indeed need to be cut to be moved. And then obviously all the work at the site where we would take it. And as the board knows, we've been contemplating moving it to the 7 Amelia Drive location. So following the last discussion we had on this topic, we've been looking into various aspects. Brian Turbot, the town's finance director, is connecting with Vertex, which is the town's on-call OPM, to assess the management of this move and meeting the timetable which the land bank has laid out. They, since our last meeting, they've clarified that it's important to them that this building be moved by June 15th. We sent a note earlier today, which I have forwarded the response from the land bank to you all. But as you can see there, they're indicating that if the building cannot be moved by June 15th, then they're still willing to donate the house, but they would no longer be willing to offer the $87,000 toward the cost of the move in conjunction with the building. We don't have, as I mentioned, Brian Turbot is in the, has, reached out previously to John Lemieux at Vertex and is in the process of, trying to connect with him. And I believe we have had input from Erica that in terms of, getting it over the road, if everything else falls into place, may be doable within the time frame, but to some degree we're still gathering information on whether it can happen by the June 15th date.
Great. Thank you for the update, Tucker. Questions from board members? Rima?
Has Toscana said that they can do it by the date?
So the land bank originally, they were the party that originally reached out to Toscana about doing this project, and they provided the estimate and I believe the timetable to them. So I believe the answer is yes, but again, we need the OPM at the center to ensure that all of the dominoes can fall in the right order.
Now, Tucker, to clarify on some of the stuff I said go out, there was some discussion when we talked about this at one of the last meeting that there's some proposal on the table that the first floor would be office space and that it would be a subterranean apartment and a second floor apartment. Is that still the intent? I think some board members raised some concerns about going to a lower level apartment at the last meeting.
Yes. No, some board members definitely raised that question. I think, so I don't know that it's essential to make a determination today, like what's on the first floor and what's on the second or on the basement level. I will say a couple of things that, so this site is, as folks know, that we're intending is along Amelia Drive. It's immediately next door to Keeper's Restaurant. And the new roadway that will connect Amelia to Waite Drive will go, right by the building on the other side. So to some degree, this location is going to have, quite a bit of visibility from passers-by and frequenters of the restaurant next door. It's going to be relatively, I'd say, relatively high. And we had a chance since the last meeting to, reperuse Amelia Drive, and to my knowledge, there is not another first floor residential situation on that street. And so I think there is a case to be made that keeping the first floor as office or residential may make some sense from that standpoint, as well as the fact that the way it is presently like built out interiorly, there's sort of it's built in to be an office, and not that couldn't relatively easily be changed, but I guess a question that for the board to have to determine is, we could be setting up in a first floor living situation kind of a fishbowl with these three sides. And if it's, if it's not going to be a fishbowl, meaning, shades could be drawn and therefore, that's how you might get privacy from folks going by on the street or coming into the restaurant. Is that really like the look that we're going for? In discussion with the architect, who we initially reached out to assess, just the feasibility of doing this, Matt McEachran, I think the general feeling is that, and quite an interesting and frankly more private living situation could be created in the below grade level, versus the ground floor level. So anyway, those are just thoughts. Like I said, I'm not sure that is like the main thing we need to determine today. I don't know if that influences the board's decision over whether they want to do the project or not. But happy to discuss whatever is helpful.
Okay, thanks, Tucker.
may I say something?
Eleanor, real quick, and then I'm going to come to Dave.
Yes, just it occurred to me that there is and Tucker is probably aware of this. There is a restriction in the CN district that no more than 50% of the first floor can be residential. So that's an element that you need to take into consideration in the planning.
Dave?
Well, that what Eleanor just stated makes it complex, I guess. But I mean, I have a problem with the below grade. Just the zoning board will tell you they're trying to get away from it. I think that I think it's bad form for us to move forward with below grade living. So I just have a concern about that. And then that leads to, what's our cost per unit if that's not part of the equation? So just thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Penny, I saw you have a reaction earlier. Allison, you'll be next. Penny's good. Go ahead, Allison.
Just another thought, not so much a question, but a thought that I know that our hope is to put additional dwellings on this site because I know it can have additional dwellings. So if we're talking about the function of this one dwelling because of the layout as it already is, it might be worth then talking about what the layouts of the additional dwellings are going to be. Are those dwellings also going to have first floor offices? Or are they going to be primarily residential, or can we not even do that because of the zoning? It just might be worth a conversation about the bigger project for that lot so that we have a vision going forward.
Any other questions or comments? Tucker, are you looking for an action item or a vote from us today?
I mean, I don't think that we're in a position to really vote yet until we know from the OPM the timing of when this could happen.
Okay.
Yeah. So we meet again in 2 weeks, and I certainly would hope at that point we're going to have more visibility.
All right. So Brooke has a statement, and then I have one myself. Go ahead, Brooke.
Tucker, do you have any sense of what the logic of not funding the move if we can't make the June 15th deadline is from the land bank?
I don't know that I can speak. Oh, Ken has his hand up here.
Go ahead, Ken.
The reason for that is what I was told by Eric and Jesse, is that the board of the land bank decided that it was important for them to be able to have the area available for use by the public for this summer. And therefore, the resolution is that the funding would be there as an incentive for us to get it done. And if it wasn't done so that the property wouldn't be available for their use, they were not interested in providing the funding for the move.
Thank you, Ken. My personal, thoughts. Oh, Penny, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do think if this is something we're serious about, to get this thing permitted and done by June 15th, we need to move now or relatively quickly.
Yeah, I'm super appreciative personally of the land bank and bringing this opportunity to us. I'm just concerned about the location when we're talking about 2 apartments, commercial space, parking requirements, green space, another building going up on it. I worry that we're trying to push square peg round hole onto this site to meet all the requirements. I definitely want to see a way to repurpose this building because I recognize that it's a very quality constructed building for what it is. Just my things on my radar. I have some concern about creating a subterranean apartment and spending dollars in that direction. Looks like I just created a whole bunch of questions and comments. So I'm going to come to Dave, then Rima, then Ken. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's smart for us as a board to really kind of hone in on what our cost per unit is on the big picture of this whole lot. And we all appreciate the land bank and them offering the building and paying the move is huge. But for us to just jump at that carrot and not look more carefully at the whole lot and how much it's going to cost us per unit for each building on the lot, I think would be foolish. And I'm not saying we should stop here, but we need to get the RFP, see what it costs us and see what the price per unit is going to be. And if we can do better with a different program.
Thank you, Dave. Rima?
I would hope that now that we've run into, snag with procurement, that the land bank would be a little more understanding that their June 15th deadline might be highly unreasonable, given the hoops that we have to go through. Or if they have someone else that's willing to take it and get it off of there, by June 15th, then I guess, I would say maybe we should give it up. But, the idea of them saying, yeah, we'll pay for the move if you get it off by a certain time, and then, not pay if the building hangs around a little longer. Well, not a little longer because you can't move during the summer, but I don't know. I think it might be worth going back to the land bank if we do really, want to move forward with this, because I don't think that, just holding that dangling that carrot to make things happen before they actually can happen is reasonable.
Thank you, Rima. Ken, you had a comment?
Oh yeah, just one point. This building will not disappear. They have a number of other people that would be very interested in it. If we decide that it doesn't work for us, so I'm just suggesting that the decision should be made in terms of what's best for us, because you don't have to worry about this not being able to be available to be reused within the community.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Well, I don't know that gives you any resolution to the conversation, Tucker, but I think that's a thoughtful update, some important points raised and made, and we can wait for the OEM to come back to us on it.
Yeah, like I said, hopefully at the next meeting, we will have, input from the OPM that will address some of the questions that were brought up here. As I mentioned and in the note forwarded just before the meeting, it does sound like the building is still available to us. If it doesn't move by June 15th, it's just we don't get the 87,000 toward whatever we're going to need to put into the project. At least that's the way they're proposing it right now.
Okay, great. I think we have one member of the public with a question or comment. Tobias, did you want to make a comment?
Sure. I'm hesitant, but I would say, just as a member of the public, I would encourage the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to, it seems like in my mind, the land bank has made an effort to try to work with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And, you kind of got a spot picked out. Maybe there's some pros and cons to it, but like move on it or don't, you know, like if it fits, go ahead for it and do it and make it happen. But you know, you sometimes in life, you can't know everything. You got to make a decision, and like, don't wait around. Either say, no, we don't want to do it, or move forward. Just my 2 cents on them. Just
Thanks for your 2 cents, Tobias. I see Megan has her hand up from the public for a comment or question. Please, if you could identify yourself when you take your off of mute.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Sure, it's Megan Perry. Tobias just said it way better than I'm going to. I was just going to say fish or cut bait on this one. I feel like you're going around in circles on it. Just it needs a decision to be made so you can move forward or not. That was it.
Thank you. I'll go one more board comment and I think we can wrap up. Brooke?
So I just want to respond to Tobias and Megan in that we're a little bit between a rock and a hard place because the time frame here doesn't allow us to do an adequate financial assessment of what it's going to cost. And we do have a fiduciary responsibility on the dollars that have been allocated for us for housing. And so, I mean, we are trying to balance the timeline with that fiduciary responsibility, and that does lead to this sort of rock and a hard place position that I think we feel that we're in. And so I just want to lay that out for the record as well. And I think as an explanation because we could equally be criticized for not accepting the donation or accepting it and paying more per unit than we could do on some other effort that on that site. And so that's what we're wrestling with here as a board. And I just want to make that clear for the record. Thanks.
Appreciate the clarification. And I agree with you. Thank you. Any more? Seeing none, Dave, one last item.
I'm sorry, and maybe I missed this, but, and this, I guess, is for Tucker. Where are we in the process? Have we developed an RFP?
We do. Go ahead, Tucker.
We're the OPM, the on-call OPM is going to, like, that is something that they would prepare. I mean, he is going to assess the ability to meet the timetable as well as procure the work that is required.
And to be clear on that, Tucker, that is specifically, Dave, to move this structure to the property. We do not have an RFP in place for the full development of the site, if that is your question. So
what's our time frame on those numbers?
The OPM, you know, Brian knows that we want to be able to make a determination about moving forward here rather quickly. Now, I mean, I kind of agree a bit with what Tobias had to say. Like, I'm not sure that figuring out exactly what the remainder of the development of the site looks like, immediately is the thing. This is, I would probably add that I can't imagine any scenario that we could come up with where the cost per unit would be less than taking this building and utilizing it, particularly given the condition of it and, how it's done. So, like I said, some of this is, stuff that can be figured out later, which floors have what unit, that layout stuff. But, I think it would be terrific to make it happen. But I share, like, absolutely the concern about the timetable. And so that's where, we kind of had a all hands on deck. Can we get this done by June 15th? So that we're, Greg Tibnan, Brian Turbett, Erica Mooney, Ken and I, all involved, and trying to see if it can happen on this timetable.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tucker. So we'll carry it until we have an update from that group. Moving to item number 10, financial discussion, and I'll put that to you, Tucker, to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I'll maybe move fairly quickly here, but as the board will recall, over the course of the last several meetings, we've been talking about funding for the trust for the upcoming period. And Christy's gonna have to help me with my recollection here, but I think we had gone, coming out of the last trust meeting, to that group that Christy mentioned earlier, with the recommended funding coming from a combination of town CPC bonding, I should say town ordinary budgeting, as well as town override funding to meet the various program requirements that we had outlined and are included in the spreadsheet in the packet, I believe. So the punchline, I guess, of the meeting we had with that group was, I believe that, and Christy can definitely chime in, I believe that everyone understood what we are seeking, the rationale for each of the different amounts, and are generally supportive of that overall picture. Now, in total, just over that 3-year period, it would be 3 or 4 year period, but it would, I think it accumulated to roughly 34 million. I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the sheet at the same time I'm looking at you all. But in conversation with the group, it was determined for a variety of reasons that the best approach with regard to this upcoming annual town meeting was to support the 475,000 operating budget support as we had wanted in our work we had done over prior meetings. And in addition, one override for 7.5 million toward the safe harbor maintenance being the next period beyond the upcoming 2-year period. So it's not that money would get spent next year, but we need to know we have the ability to spend it if necessary to subsidize more than likely the Orange Street project. So that is what that group, I believe, unanimously supported putting forward. That is what we are going to be talking about in front of the select board tomorrow. I think part of the thinking is that that would allow us to do the work that we need to do over the course of this next year, including going to the CPC in the fall, and perhaps seeking perhaps some of these other sources that we, it's fantastic. There's a smorgasbord of potential options on the table, and in terms of ongoing reliable funding. And so I think part of the thinking was to see where the voters felt like ongoing funding would best come from. So Christy, please add anything you think is important.
Go ahead, Christy.
Thank you. Through you, Brian. One of the other things I just wanted to touch base on, that we got confirmation from town council that CPA funds must go to 100% of AMI or less. That was something that we were all concerned about in our last meeting. They are looking into if we could do a special act to increase that to be above 100%, but I haven't received any information back, Tucker. I don't know if you have. No, not yet. So that was a big reason as to why we don't want to kind of put all our eggs in a basket of CPC funding and trying to look at a variety of different options. So I think overall it was a good discussion, and Tucker covered everything that we discussed.
I apologize to have to ask, but I'm just slightly unclear. So it would be a one-time 7.5 override with an annual this year of 470,000 in addition to the override in the regular budget, where the 7.5 would be restricted to 100% AMI, or would not be restricted? Would not be restricted.
200%.
Would be restricted to 200%. And then would this fall into the bucket of $100,000 plus for Board of Selectmen approval, or at $1?
This would be the normal 100,000.
Okay, great. So any expenditures over 100, great. Okay. Other members of the board, Christy?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. We were asking the 475,000 is this year's budget, but for that to be an ongoing consideration from the select board. So a yearly line item for affordable housing.
And that's to be expended on programs, not necessarily staff or office. That could be accomplished in the same venue or a different venue.
It would include a staff person, an additional staff person, and it does include an allocation toward office.
Questions from other members of the board? Brooke?
Yes, so just as a point of clarification, the borrowing authorizations that we get can't be used for operational expenses, staff, salaries, rent, for office space, any of that. So having that 470,000 a year in the budget would fund the things that we have to do to function, communications, consultants, et cetera. So it's really important that is available every year, because these bonding authorizations as an alternative can't be used for that. So.
Great. Any more discussion from the board? Christy, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask the Affordable Housing Trust, when it comes to select board tomorrow, if there's anything particular as a select board rep that you want me to relay back to the rest of the board, you can let me know now or send me an email before tomorrow night's meeting.
Seeing anybody, I don't see any hands, but I will say as a member, thank you very much for the effort, right, in getting this conversation on the table. As Tucker mentioned, it's exciting that there are a myriad of potential opportunities for regular funding so we can get stuff accomplished and more done. I super appreciate administration kind of working with this committee to get this to conversation tomorrow night. So the opportunity is exciting from my perspective. So, if there's no more comments from the board, we do have questions from two members of the general public. I'll start with Julia Lindner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question perhaps through you or to you directly, just so I'm clearly understanding. First of all, it's amazing that you guys put this in the packet, all of these great financials to help us follow along. I just want to make sure, when you say override for the $7.5 million in 2023, is that a one-time override, or is that a in perpetuity?
I'm going to direct a question through me to Tucker.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is proposed as a one-time override. That override. Okay,
if I may.
Go ahead.
I put a sticker on. Sorry, I'm back. So I guess this is technical, but when you say override, you may lead people to believe that you mean an annual override. And so what you're saying is basically like a capital override, which is a one-time override. I'm not sure how you message it, but it may lend it to be a little confusing that way. So anyways, thank you for clarifying that. This is great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. Tobias, do you have a continued question?
Yeah, just just because I was so involved in all this, just a general feedback, Tucker and board. I think this is really great. I would love to know, if I was a member of the public and reading this and wanting to like continue this conversation about like what are we trying to do, what are we trying to get to, it'd be nice to see just like how many units are on the shy list, just a little blurb. Like I love just seeing like, it's one thing to see where the money's at, but it's another thing to see like what we've done, and I just think like if you're going to have this out, or like if you're going to present this to the board, the select board, like just remind them about what we've done, how many more units we have to create. It's one thing just to throw up funding in 2023. It's another to say like, hey, this, this is what we've done so far. It's what we're on track to do. Just helpful.
Thanks, Tobias. Christy?
Thank you, Tobias. I think that's really helpful feedback, and something that we keep saying verbally is this will kind of line us up to be at our 10% by 2025 in terms of units on the shy list, not necessarily built out and heads to the beds, but it's a good target to have, to at least be at that 10%. But I think what you're mentioning is having something visual or something for the community to kind of grasp and hold on to is a really good suggestion. So thank you.
Is that something potentially, Tucker, that the communications group can kind of work? Is it to ask Florencia to put together a handout, a one-time, I don't know that it's probably unfair to ask for tomorrow's select board meeting, but maybe for our next meeting, that can be something we can put together and review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate Tobias's comments. I was going to say, if I owned the meat deli, like we've been making the sausage, like now we're at the point where we can dress it nicely, present it in a beautiful little rack, and hopefully have lots of customers. But I hear you. I hear you.
Can I get a communications committee kind of thumbs up as far as be willing to tackle a bullet list of a presentation material, Brooke? That I got thumbs up? Okay. Thanks, gang. Any more on the items in the financial discussion that you want to touch base? Tobias, your hand is down even though it's up, right? You're good?
I'm good. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. All right. Go ahead, Tucker.
I mean, so unless the board, a member of the board or the board as a whole feels, wildly differently, that what we just outlined is what we're, as this group involving Libby, Brian Turbot, Denise, John Giorgio, Christy, myself, I'm sure I'm forgetting someone, but this is kind of the recommendation we're putting forward to the board tomorrow night.
Great. So this is coming from administration. It would require a 2/3 vote at town meeting and then a majority vote at the ballot for the override portion. Whereas the simple budget item would go into the full budget and requires vote as one of the first items in the meeting. Okay. Great. Thank you.
So sorry, Mr. Chair. It may be just useful to the board to hear that the trust, supports this recommendation. So if we could take a vote, that probably would be helpful.
So looking for a motion on the presentation to the Board of Selectmen tomorrow and making a recommendation to them on the proposal of the 470 and separately the $7.5 million override. Brooke?
I would move to support the recommendation to the select board.
I would second that.
So moved by Brooke, seconded by Rima. By roll call, Dave Iverson?
Aye.
Allison Mitchell?
Aye.
Penny Dye?
Aye.
Brooke Moore?
Aye.
Rima Sherry?
Wholeheartedly aye.
Christy Ferrantella?
Aye.
And Brian Sullivan, aye. Thank you guys for the work as on our behalf. So closing there, item number 11, other business. We have 2 meetings on the calendar, a special meeting February 8th at 1 p.m. and a regularly scheduled meeting February 16th at 1 p.m. Any discussion on either of those? Seeing none, I guess we just kind of post that and move on to public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda. Are there any members of the public that have comment? Seeing none, we'll close item 12, public comment. Move on to item 13, board comments. Any board comments unrelated to anything on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll close item 13 and go to item 14, executive session. So I'm looking for a motion. Brooke jumping on it, beating you to it, Penny.
Thank you, Eleanor. I move that the Affordable Housing Trust go into close the open session to go into executive session to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property where an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body and not return to open session.
Is there a second? Forgive me, any discussion on the motion? No, second?
Yeah, I'm just going to recuse myself.
Penny, I think there might be multiple items if you would join us in executive session.
At the beginning?
Yes, please.
Got it.
Ciao.
Okay, I'm looking for a second on Brooke's motion.
Second.
Okay, so seconded by Rima by roll. Dave Iverson.
Aye.
Allison Mitchell.
Aye.
Penny Dye.
Aye.
Brooke Moore.
Aye.
Rima Sherry.
Aye.
Steve Ferrantella.
Aye.
And Brian Sullivan, aye.
We have
yes.
5 minutes, please. I need 5 minutes.
Totally.
So 2:30.
2:30, we'll see you back there. Thanks, Tucker.
Thank you, guys.